inside Andrew Rawnsley, their columnist, is a bit sceptical, but an interesting story to talk about. There's the Sunday Express saying that a lot of people are fleeing Britain to get medical treatment in hospitals abroad, and a picture of Prince Charles in Australia looking slightly odd. Then there's the Sunday Telegraph. Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, picking up on that very, very important story all week about the stabbings and the shootings, saying there are enough bobbies on the beat, it's all right, and she's got a new task force. We'll be talking about that with Sajid Javid later in the programme. And then there's the Sunday Times with Sarah Montague, cross about the pay gap, a very good piece she's written inside about that. But also their main story, the Skripals, Sergei and Yulia, being offered new identities, they say. With CIA help, they're going to disappear off to America and become different people. They are both presumably talking to the authorities, so we will know more about that, much more, and we're going to be talking about that as well in the paper review. And finally, there's the Mail on Sunday, again talking about the knife crime issue. Theresa May made it tougher for the police to stop and search people randomly, but she has changed her mind, it claims on that. I'm not absolutely sure that every syllable of that story totally justifies the headlines, Mail on Sunday, but very interesting. Well done. Thank you very much. Anyway, we're going to start off talking about the Skripals, I think, Julia, yes?
Yes, absolutely.
It's an amazing story, this, isn't it?
Well, 5 weeks on, it is extraordinary. And the fact that this is also obviously front-page news in Russia, as we've been discovering this week, with the niece of Sergei Skripal on the television virtually every night.
I mean, a few weeks ago, to be ghoulish about it, not to be ghoulish about it, we thought they were dying.
I mean, that was what was being said at the hospital.
And they'd never regained consciousness, and now they're talking.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary. And thank goodness. And thank goodness also for the police officer as well, who could have also possibly lost his life. But this is the interesting thing. I think the more interesting thing about this is not that actually the idea that the Americans could help with offering alternative identities and a new life in America, much easier to protect them. The concern being they have to be in a Five Eyes country, one of our biggest sort of staunchest allies, but we know that we can keep them safe.
But Five Eyes.
Five Eyes. Well, you know,
What's
yes, it's Five Eyes. It's basically it's the Anglosphere to all intents and purposes. But it's interesting that the Russians are demanding to meet with Yulia now she's awake. Yulia apparently doesn't want to meet with them, and of course we know yesterday the niece's visa hasn't been granted. But it is interesting what Boris Johnson has said, because we had some extraordinary scenes this week at the Russian embassy with the Russian ambassador playing sort of comical alley. We were back to Iraq, Baghdad.
It was very bizarre.
Yes, there's nothing to see here while the bombs are dropping behind him.
What Boris is writing today in the papers, trying to
This is the Sunday Times.
It's in the Sunday Times, trying to exculpate himself. He has bungled yet again on one of the most crucial diplomatic. He is the most undiplomatic.
He doesn't do detail, and Foreign Office requires all politics requires detail.
Lazy, sloppy. Never reads his brief. You think what he's done to the Iranian captive.
Just to remind people, what we're talking about here is that there was an interview with the guy heading Porton Down, and he said, yes, we have
identified this. Which was also a car
this.
Crash interview.
Yes, we've identified this as Novichok. We don't know where it came from. And that seemed to contradict what Boris Johnson had told German television, where he said they were absolutely categorical.
No, he'd spoken to the guy at Porton Down.
His words absolutely categorical. There wasn't actually a question there.
He said, this guy, no question about it. And the handling of, as we know, the handling of sensitive intelligence information is so important. You get it wrong, you discredit everything.
But it's interesting that the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, isn't even given the most sensitive information because it's not thought
well, what's interesting is that Boris Johnson here is trying to put the blame onto Corbyn. I mean, Corbyn is not the story in this. Whether he acted well or badly, he's not the story. He's calling him infantile and a Kremlin's useless idiot, useful idiot. The story has been this week the idiocy of Boris Johnson.
Look, I absolutely agree. I think absolutely total incompetence from Boris Johnson. I wouldn't have him in the job in the first place. But the reality is, when you have the official leader of Her Majesty's opposition basically spouting Kremlin lines on this issue, I don't think it's not irrelevant.
I'm nervously and worriedly going to not stand up for him, but just put the other side of the case, which is that in that German TV interview, it wasn't clear that he was saying it was absolutely categorical that it had come from Russia. He was saying it was absolutely categorical that it was Novichok, which is what the Porton Down guy said. So to that extent, it wasn't actually a slip. The trouble is that any possible syllable slipping one way or another, the Russians are so aggressive they just dive straight in.
And they've been able to exploit that on social media and on their own media.
And of course, it was very perilous because we have a coalition which has been terrific of people supporting us, of countries, allies, friends supporting us. Boris put that at risk.
Okay, Julia, you have a tablet there. And you're going to tell us about something else the Russians have been up to.
Well, indeed. And again, let's all be terribly surprised at the idea, are the Russians using chemical weapons? Well, they're backing a Syrian regime which is using chemical weapons. It's believed overnight, this attack on civilians in eastern Ghouta, leading, of course, all the news broadcasts today.
A hideous story.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Guardian copy from earlier this morning saying 41 dead. It looks like, I think, 70 possibly, and many, many hundreds more. Again, targeting innocent civilians, children hit in this chemical attack. We've got to stop the nonsense that they are not using chemical weapons. They are using them. And of course, I have to say, I do think we need to remember that it was our country that chose not to get involved even after chemical weapons attacks as a result of votes in Parliament led by former Labour leader Ed Miliband.
The Middle East is aflame again. I mean, there's lots of Palestinian kids being killed further south as well by the Israeli forces.
But these are lessons. We learnt lessons from Iraq and Afghanistan of what happens when we do it, when we get involved and get it wrong. Well, now we've learnt about what happens when we don't get involved and get it wrong.
Let's move to the big domestic story, Polly. That's the Sunday Telegraph and Amber Rudd talking about knife crime.
The horrors of the recent murders on the streets, kids killing each other, not just in London, but London's taken the main focus of it recently, but in fact it's all over the place. There's Amber Rudd trying to say having cut the police by 20% is irrelevant, which is hard to believe, but also coming up with some quite good practical suggestions for restricting access to horror knives.
Zombie knives, though.
Zombie knives.
Weird-looking knives.
Weird-looking things. And indeed acid, and that's all quite sensible. But in the end, the police themselves have said, you know, this is a social question. The London police have said this is a social question. You cannot expect the police to come in and mop up after profound social problems, which are about the huge cuts in youth services. One of the first things to go in 2010, but vast cuts in youth services, even those programmes specifically targeted at gangs and preventing kids getting into gangs. Also mental health. You look at, you know, children and adolescent mental health has taken the biggest cut, and that's where you have to get them early on. Every programme that might draw kids away from being pulled into local gangs has been cut to pieces.
I think there are massive social questions, and I don't think that the number of police officers on the street necessarily makes a difference to whether someone thinks that if someone slights them on Instagram, that it's appropriate to then go and stab them, which is where we are. No, but there are two other big issues. One is total abject failure at schools. A lot of the young lads who end up in gangs at 13, 14 have been failed long ago. We need to be intervening far, far earlier. They're leaving primary school semi-literate.
I think it's very hard to expect teachers to solve this enormous social problem. People put it on schools and they put it on the police.
No, I'm not putting it on schools. I'm saying also we can't keep ignoring the abject breakdown of family units. There will not be a father in a single one of these homes.
The other big issue here, of course, in terms of tactics, is stop and search. And there's a very interesting piece by Trevor Phillips, who is the Equal Opportunities Commission there. Talking about stop and search.
He's making a point I've been making all week that, you know, it's not middle class white kids who are being stabbed or doing the stabbing. It's black working class kids. You know, look, it would have been dealt with much quicker if it was our kids who were getting stabbed. It would have been dealt with last week.
Theresa May changed, in some respects, behaved in quite a kind of liberal way, because a lot of black kids in particular felt that stop and search, the old sus laws, were very, very oppressive.
Well, no, they didn't feel it. It was absolutely the case. I mean, post McPherson and
hundreds of people being stopped.
I've spoken to black reverends who get searched every week in their 60s. No doubt at all there are some racist police who do that, and we needed to tackle that. But the reality is, this sort of street crime is black on black street crime. You're going to have to be searching black kids.
And you need a sense of deterrence. Kids need to think that if I put a knife down my trousers and walk out, I might be stopped, I might be caught.
Possibly, but what actually happened was that 92% of those who were stopped and searched had no weapons on them. And the resentment that was stirred in that community, you know, helped the gang culture, helped all of the things antisocial, anti-police attitudes.
Right. But also, if you're more scared actually of someone stabbing you than you are of the police.
Theresa May was right about this, and she hasn't done, as the Mail suggests, a huge U-turn. They're saying we're going to target, which I think everybody thinks that's right, certain areas, certain gang places, certain people who are particularly suspect.
Now, Polly, I have you here as one of the founder creators of the old SDP. And in that context, I need to talk to you about the Observer's front page story. Lots and lots of money, 50 million quid for a new party of the centre, pro-European, pro-redistribution. It sounds a little familiar to me.
Certainly sounds very familiar to me. They're even using breaking the mould, which was our 1980s. And we never broke the mould, because the mouldy old mould is unbreakable for as long as you have our appalling electoral system that doesn't allow, I mean, ask UKIP, it does not allow newcomers in at all. So I think there is not a hope in hell of this getting anywhere. Incidentally, nor is a single leading politician, any politician.
There's nobody associated
with it
at this
Nobody
stage.
dares be associated
also,
with it, because it's a toxic.
Okay,
toxic
we're right-
But if Brexit and Corbyn were about the people rising up against the elite and the establishment, £50 million from multi-millionaires is not going to play very well with the electorate.
We're slightly running out of time, but I'd like to do a couple more stories. The War Boys business. A politician saying that he's to blame. That's interesting.
This is really extraordinary. Actually, an interview in the Sun on Sunday, David Gauke, the Justice Secretary, of course, he's the one who took legal advice and chose not to challenge that parole board decision on John Warboys, the black cab rapist, being released around now he would be released. But he said, okay, it was my call, and he said we must learn the lessons, and he said it was my responsibility. It's very rare to actually have a politician.
How rare? He's a very
that.
decent man, Gauke, and I think we could have a lot more of that from politicians.
Okay. Before we finish, we need to get to the Mark Zuckerberg story, because we're going to be talking about that in a moment. All over the front page of The Observer, lots of questions for him to answer.
Carol Cadwallader, the brilliant journalist who has brought the whole issue to light, together with
Didn't
our
enjoy
whistleblower.
her time on the sofa last week, I recall.
Well, indeed.
I believe she left the studio crying, didn't she?
No, she didn't do that, but she wasn't very happy.
I can't think why, because she is one of our great journalists. And she's put here all of the questions that Mark Zuckerberg should answer if he were to agree to come before the House of Commons. And the most important one of those, of course, is about the referendum. Who saw Facebook adverts during the referendum and why? We need to know that. We need to know what went on behind the scenes, how serious it was, how important it was.
If you can do it very, very quickly, the pay gap.
Yes, gender pay gap.
Huge, if I may say so to the Sunday Times, a slightly confusing piece of graphic information there.
Yes, indeed.
An impressive amount of information gathered together nonetheless.
The biggest story of the week, and I note obviously that we're making up the gender quota for expert commentators at the BBC today.
Thank you both very much.
Nice to be invited for that and not for actually our views, but there we are. But this is the thing. Where are you in the gender pay gap? I mean, I just think an awful lot of this is a load of nonsense, totally ignoring people's age, the fact that people work part-time, the fact that people go into different jobs. And at the end of the day, you're only going to have an absolutely zero pay gap if we just tell people the jobs they have to do and how many hours they have to work.
I couldn't disagree more. This is about
the
fundamental question of how women are treated and whether having children is something that falls upon women and their future careers forever.
I definitely remember giving birth to my child, not my husband. I'm pretty sure about that. And he was rubbish at breastfeeding. He was absolutely useless at it.
We have run out of time. Thank you both very much indeed.
We will make America great again.